Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh and welcome back to some new World of Warships gameplay on my channel today. In this episode we'll be featuring the Tier VIII Russian gunboat destroyer known as the Kiev in a gameplay whose focus is all about how to gunboat. The context for this? Simply put, my good friend Lamari, or Ben as I prefer to refer to him as, has been sailing out in gunboat type destroyers as of late and has been having some success but also struggling with really nailing down the concept of a gunboat destroyer and how to apply it, particularly in the higher tier games. So this gameplay I feel is a brilliant demonstration of how to play a gunboat destroyer, and we're going to be breaking this gameplay down as much as possible to give you insights not in terms of just the ship I'm sailing, but also the thought processes I'm applying as an individual player, some tactics, the tricks I'm using, things I'm watching out for, and everything else I can in order to try and give Ben and you the viewer a better insight into how you can play your gunboat destroyer. Without further ado, let's get to it. So as the match loads in, you can see that this is going to be a Tier VIII Domination match on the map Shards. Now this being all one tier is a brilliant demonstration of how the Kiev as a gunboat destroyer fits in amongst its like-for-like tier destroyer counterparts. And as we look at our opening spawn position, we'll see that we spawned in on the northwestern side, with our ship being in the northernmost grouping of our team split. Now there's three things we need to talk about here. Firstly, our opening tactics. Secondly, our opening mentality, and thirdly, how that is altered by the fact we are in a division with our good friend Johnny, known in game as Xenopredators, who is bringing the Tier VIII American heavy cruiser known as the Baltimore. So taking that step back then to our opening position. Because we're on that northernmost edge of the spawn, we are going to be making our way towards either objectives Bravo or Charlie because they are the closest to. And with the Kiev having a top speed by default of 42.5 knots, or with the speed boost active 45.7 knots, and that is without a speed flag incorporated, that means we can make our way to either objective in a relatively short period of time, and we will get there rather quickly. However, we have to keep in mind the fact that as we are a gunboat destroyer, one of the trade-offs of our ship is the fact that it lacks good concealment. You can see that we have not spec'd the ship for concealment, and our detectability by sea as a result is 9.2 kilometers. If we look at the enemy team, we will note that the enemy's destroyers all have extremely good concealment by comparison with our own. The Z-23 of a full concealment build will have a detectability by sea of approximately 6.2 kilometers, their Ashasho approximately 5.6 kilometers, and their Ognavoy 6.1 kilometers. That means we are going to be easily outspotted by all three of their destroyers. On top of that, if we look towards their cruisers, we should note that those cruisers have rather respectable detectability by sea values as well, particularly their Otago, which if I remember correctly is somewhere in the region of 9.1 to 9.5 kilometers. Their Hipper is 11.2 kilometers with a maximum concealment build, and their Talon, whilst it does not have the best detectability by sea, somewhere in the region of 12 to 13 kilometers if I remember correctly, it does have a short-term radar set which when deployed will essentially enable them to stealth radar, i.e. they can radar within their detectability by sea and detect whatever is looking at them at the time. So they've got cruisers that can challenge us and destroyers that can outspot us. We cannot afford then in the opening portion of this game to play in a manner where we're acting as a dedicated destroyer. Instead, that is to go to our friendly destroyers. They should act in that role. So if we now turn on its head, what about acting as a dedicated gunboat early on? We'll look at the minimap, look at the map itself. You've probably seen a number of reviews where players have used gunboat destroyers and they've gone on about the fact that you always want to play in open water and you just want to keep the guns firing for as long as possible and burn down enemy ships. Now that is the generalised playstyle of a dedicated gunboat, I'm not disputing that, but Shards is not a map that offers that by default, because as you can see on the minimap in the bottom right hand corner of your screen, there are a lot of land masses throughout the map, particularly around the objectives and on the ways in and out of the objectives, which means that we do not have a huge amount of open water to play with by default. This is not the map Trap, for example, which has a lot of open water between, say, objectives Alpha and Bravo. Here, as we go between objectives even, there's a chance we're going to hit a landmass or have to navigate around one. So instead, we've got to think about the idea of incorporating a hybrid role to begin with. And a hybrid role here would be to utilise our gunboat destroyer as if it is a very light cruiser or a destroyer leader. The idea being that we're going to play like a light cruiser in getting close to objectives, using our relatively high shell arcs to shoot over landmasses and try to achieve free damage. Free damage being when you shoot at a target that does not have the ability to retaliate and deal damage to you. It's the perfect trait, and you'll see that typical light cruiser gameplay will revolve around the idea of finding hard cover, a landmass, to hide behind so you cannot be spotted easily, unless somebody uses, say, a surveillance radar or planes, and you can shoot over the landmass at spotted targets, deal huge amounts of damage, and in return take no damage unless somebody blind fires you and achieves some damage. But the difference is, of course, we do not have a citadel because we are in the destroyer class. And because we're not one of the rare exceptions which takes full penetration damage from armor piercing from, say, battleships, it means that we do not have to worry about one shell doing a huge score of damage. If we were in a light cruiser, we would have to worry about a single armor piercing shell doing in excess of 10,000 damage if it hits our citadel. In the Kiev, we can afford to trade one armor piercing over penetration, which can do up to, say, 1,500 HP. And because we've got the hill, it means that we can continue to trade effectively on that basis, but where possible, we want the free damage to begin with. And what you'll know is that because this is the opening of the game, we are going to focus on getting as close as possible to Objective Charlie and try to position ourselves in such a manner so that we've got some hard cover between us and the enemy team, which we can shoot over, and in return we are very difficult to dig out of a position. So that's going to be our opening gameplay plan. Get into a position where we can deploy ourselves in a very light cruiser role, provide harassment to the enemy team, put pressure on the enemy team, and essentially try to stem their progress in taking Objective Charlie, and try to counter the enemy destroyers that make their way in, much like we would if we were a light cruiser, such as the Edinburgh, and the Edinburgh is a brilliant example of a light cruiser at this tier, which has a concealment of 9.3 kilometers, i.e. detectability by sea, when maximised for concealment. So we play it in the same role there. Now the final point before we start is, what about the gameplay dynamic with Johnny? Well, one of the key things to note is that Johnny does have a brilliant tool that enables him to spot enemy destroyers, and that is he has an American radar set which has a decent duration and a range of 10 kilometers. Now the detectability of the Baltimore, if I remember correctly, is slightly above 10 kilometers by sea, which means he cannot stealth radar, i.e. use the radar to simply detect as soon as he is spotted what is detecting him, but it's close enough. So what it means is if he plays close enough around Objective Charlie and any enemy destroyers make their way into that objective, he will be able to spot them, and if I'm in the right position or he's in the right position, we can both punish those destroyers accordingly. But do keep in mind, Johnny is not tethered to me by the hip, and likewise I'm not tethered to him. We are not pocketed for one another, a term you'll hear in other competitive games where teammates simply focus on helping specifically one another rather than the rest of their team. We will play together where we need to, we'll help each other out where we need to, but we're also there for the betterment of our team. Let's get started. So as the timer goes down, we will be making our way towards Objective Charlie, and as we make our way over, we'll of course be expecting our carrier to provide us with information. In a carrier game, the carriers are key in the opening couple of minutes in providing as much intelligence for their team. We need to know what's going towards Charlie, or that would be our preference of course, and it'd be good to know as well what is going to Bravo. Beyond that, we couldn't really care right now what is going towards Objective Alpha, because that's not the objective we're going for. But as we make our way in towards Charlie, you'll notice that I've already spotted the position that I would like to take, and it's essentially between the two landmasses on the western side of the objective. They are both reasonably high landmasses with dips down the side of them, and that position is going to be a very strong one to take in the Kiev, so long as nobody tries to push me out of it. But of course, with a good number of teammates, not just Johnny, but a good number of wider teammates going towards this objective, including our Monarch, North Carolina and Le Fantastique, it means that I've got ample support to take this position and comfortably feel as though I can hold on to it for a good period of time until the enemy team applies a lot of pressure. Meanwhile, we can see that our friendly dive bombers are making their way across Bravo and in the gap between Bravo and Charlie, and this is important because that means we are going to get a lot of intelligence very early on our side of the map, so this is very helpful to us. And we can see that Italian's been spotted, that radar cruiser we were on about earlier, the enemy Odin, and also the Amagi. That means we've got two battleships we can look to burn down later on, but we've also got a cruiser and a destroyer making its way in. And that cruiser is in the form of the Z20. Sorry, not that cruiser. That destroyer is in the form of the Z23. Now I've paused the gameplay here because I need to talk about what I'm thinking at this immediate moment. You'll notice that I'm not quite in position yet, but I'm almost there. But because the Z23 has been spotted, I immediately think of what would I do if I'm in a dedicated destroyer. If I was the Z23 right now, I would know that I cannot contest Charlie safely because of the looming carrier threat unless I go in with a smokescreen up. Because the smokescreen will give me the concealment factor to be able to take Charlie before the smoke dissipates and the carrier can start hitting me again. But of course, having read the team sheet, I would know that the Baltimore is on the enemy team, so that's Johnny in this instance, and that he may have gone towards objective Charlie because he hasn't been spotted yet, or I believe he hasn't been spotted, or he will be shortly, and that 10km radar, if positioned well enough, could radar me out of my smoke in objective Charlie. So if I was to go into the objective, I would be turning my destroyer away as soon as possible, so that way I can run away should the Baltimore deploy its radar against me, because I don't know what else is going to be looking to take me out. And now, coming back to myself in the Kiev, you'll see that the position I have taken enables me to put as much damage as possible in on the Z23, both when it is going into the objective and also when it is going to leave the objective, assuming that Johnny decides to deploy his radar at the right time to catch the Z23 off guard. So I'm going to be in a position where I can capitalise on this and use my guns to great effect. But this is exactly what a light cruiser would be doing right now. This is no different from what I would do in an Edinburgh. The only difference is I've got there faster. The Edinburgh, with speed of just shy of 33 knots, would not be in this position immediately, it would be delayed by a few seconds, whereas with the Kiev, we can get here a lot sooner. So as we resume then, you'll see that our opening salvo goes in. We are spotted, however. Now this fact we've been spotted at the time, we're going to pause again, this is another key bit of information I've got to factor in. I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about where we could be spotted from. Now if you say objective Bravo, right, I would 100% agree with you. That is where I would be thinking that I'm being spotted from right now. Because if anything on the enemy team has gone up towards the eastern side of the map already, it must have speed boosted all the way along the 10 line into the 9 line to be able to provide the spotting. But our Lexington has been covering that in terms of visibility, so there's nothing there that can be spotting me right now. So as a result, whatever it is that's detecting me right now, it's probably a destroyer, and it's probably gone towards objective Bravo. Now we're going to be surprised a little bit later on as to what it really is that's spotting us and where it is, but still, the Z23 right now is in a very difficult position and they've made their progress in towards objective Charlie, as I've personally predicted. And note here already how I'm repositioning myself to make sure that the Talon, the Amagi and the Odin cannot get good shots on me. The only thing that can return fire right now on a reliable basis is potentially the Z23 if they react accordingly. And this is how the play begins. Because as the Z23 now goes through smoke, notice that where Johnny is positioned in relation to the Z23, he is practically in a position to radar the Z23. I'm still being spotted right now and I'm not 100% sure what it is that's spotting me, but I know I'm safe from it because I'm parallel to where it's going to be spotting me from. And as we can see, that smoke screen is being expanded to take Charlie. Johnny has responded by deploying his radar, and some shells have come in from the Odin or the Amagi, but they are inaccurate because they're trying to shoot over landmass. And now we can go to town on the Z23, as can Johnny and the rest of our team up here, with the Z23 having overcommitted into their smoke and not anticipated the situation. But we take a pause here because notice in return the counterplay that the enemy team has tried to deploy. I am being radared in return right now by the enemy Talon. But the Talon, with its short duration radar, is actually not getting anything out of this other than giving the Z23 a dying swan song. In the fact that the Z23 is the only ship on the enemy team right now that can reliably hit me or get good shots on me. And also, just to point out, remember earlier I said about I wasn't sure where I was being spotted from? Look on the minimap and what you'll see is the enemy Ashashio has just been spotted making their way between Bravo and Charlie. And what it was, simply put, the Ashashio actually tried to come in via the northeastern side of Objective Bravo, but realised there was too much pressure on them to do so, and decided actually to turn their way back up towards the southern side of Objective Charlie. But in the process, they did briefly have a line of sight on me, which they no longer have, because if you draw a line on the minimap between them and I, what you'll notice is that that line will be intersected by the landmass, which is off towards the aft of our ship right now, or the landmass that also plays off of effectively the starboard side of the ship. And coming back to the main point here, because of where I'm positioned between the two landmasses off to the western side of Charlie, I can't be hit successfully by the Tallinn, and the enemy battleships are going to have a nightmare of a day, and I'm not a worthy target right now for them to throw their guns in. They've probably got better targets they can hit on a more consistent basis. So as we resume right now, the Z-23 is going to struggle, and with the Tallinn's radar expiring as well, because it is short duration, you can see that the Z-23, as they try to go forward to duke my shells, and they've thrown some torpedoes out as well in anticipation of us overextending our position. We already expected that was coming. That is the Z-23 gone, through the teamwork between myself and Johnny, and now with the enemy Odin finding itself off towards the southeastern side of the objective, notice how the Odin is completely out of position compared to the rest of its team. And now we can begin to deploy the gunboat aspect of our ship, in the fact we're just going to keep the guns firing for as long as possible. But again, I hear you say right now, isn't this just light cruiser gameplay, because all you're doing is sat behind a landmass and firing without being spotted? That is correct, because we have no need right now to go into open water and kite and harass this Odin. We're harassing them happily from behind cover, and we'll look to set a fire or two. But there is no need for us to get ourselves detected for a long period of time, because we can keep throwing in salvo after salvo to deal damage, and this is all positive damage. We are taking none in return unless the Odin decides to try and fire a blind shot. And with the Yamagi making their way all the way along the 10 line up towards the eastern side, it's not looking good. But now we have to pause once again, because a new dynamic has entered the game. You'll notice that we are now plane spotted, and that is by the enemy carriers rocket planes. But again, the reason why I picked this position specifically is because I'm between two landmasses, which means I'm very difficult to strike from the north and south. Because what you have to remember is that when rocket planes, if I remember correctly, when rocket planes fly over a landmass, that messes with their aim. It essentially raises their aim from the current point where they're targeting on the sea or the ground. So as they go over the landmass, they're not going to be able to get a reliable drop on my ship, and the only way they would do so is by flying in, I should say, from the west or east of my current position. But the problem with that approach is that consumes a huge amount of time, and also it leaves them prone to actually running across the AA circles of our North Carolina and also Johnny's Baltimore. And if they do that, with the Kaga being a carrier which has a lot of planes but very fragile planes, it means that the Kaga's actually going to be trading a huge number of planes off in order to target me. So what you'll see instead is that the Kaga decides, you know what, I'm not a worthwhile target, I can't be here, so they instead go for Alga Fantastique, and while they do get the drop off, in the process they trade out a lot of plane health to do so. And that, I would argue, is because we've made ourselves the least appetising target, so the Kaga has had to go for an alternative target, and you'll see that their attention is drawn elsewhere after this strike for a brief period of time, because they've got no reliable way of hitting me, nor the rest of the team up towards Objective Charlie. Because we're in an AA blob, for the most part, and the one ship that's not in an AA blob is very hard to hit, and will force the Kaga's planes into the AA blob to hit it. So as we resume now, all we need to do for the time being is keep throwing hit after hit into the Odin. Now this is a long-winded process, we're not going to be getting huge damage, but at the same time, if we can set a fire or two or take out one or two secondaries, it's always helpful. You never know what can happen. But we're just going to keep throwing this in, and the Odin has to push in here to try and get themselves safe, because if they turn broadside right now to run away, then they get shredded by armour piercing. So we've caught the Odin in the worst possible position. We have forced the battleship to over-push the mark. And as we have briefly spotted there, the only thing that could be briefly spotting us is if the enemy Ashashio has made their way out towards Objective Charlie, and sure enough, they've gone into their smoke. Now this again is important with our North Carolina falling and the Ashashio picking up that kill through their torpedoes and them going into smoke. This again changes the entire dynamic of the situation. And we have to pause here because there's a lot of mental items that are going through in one go. I know the Odin is dead. I don't have to worry about it anymore, because whilst it has pushed very hard, it has traded all of its health to get to this position, and it will burn down very shortly. So now I've got to think about the Ashashio. And you're probably thinking immediately, well, the Ashashio's gone to smoke in Charlie, knowing that it couldn't be spotted by you. Correct if you thought that, by the way, because that's exactly the logic I'm going by. The Ashashio should know that I have very poor concealment. 9.2 kilometers versus somewhere in the region of 5.6 kilometers, there is almost a 4 kilometer sea gap between us. The Ashashio will know I'm coming well before I'm able to see it. So the only reason the Ashashio would go to smoke here is because they're trying to confirm the capture. But then again, they're doing that in reaction to the anticipation of a push from either myself or Le Fantastique. So what that also tells me is that that smoke screen is going to be their coffin, because the only reason you would lay that smoke is if you're either looking to capture an objective and you are anxious about a potential return push, or alternatively you are looking to use that smoke screen to shoot from it. And that's what the Ashashio does here. They park up in a smoke screen on objective Charlie to take the objective and also to fire their guns, I believe, are Monarch and the Fantastique. But of course, in return, the number one rule I as a player always apply when I see a smoke screen is, if there's a destroyer in that smoke screen, torp it, because you've got a very good chance of that destroyer being forced out of the smoke by the torpedoes, or one of those torpedoes is going to make its mark. And here, what you're also going to see is, because I've noticed that smoke screen has started outside of the objective, it started on the southeastern edge and then moved in. For the Ashashio to continue capturing the flag, they need to have moved into the centre or the northernmost edge of that smoke screen. And so long as they're making capture progress, they're going to be either in the centre of the northmost edge. So that is where I'm going to put all my torpedoes. Because if the Ashashio decides to pull out the objective, I'm absolutely fine with that. But the flip side of the coin is, remembering that we have a radar cruiser nearby, we've always got Johnny's radar on standby should we need it to find the Ashashio at a later date. And that's just something we can apply later on. It's not something that I'm going to order Johnny to do, but I know we have that asset in hand so long as Johnny doesn't sink. And he's not in a position to sink right now because he's got good cover from the Odin and also the Amagi. So as we resume, you'll see that very shortly I'm going to throw down my 2x5 sets as I get a double fire on the Odin, and the Talon once again deploys its radar. And that is a wasted radar. I can see why the Talon tried to do it, because they wanted to give the Ashashio the ability to shoot at me and also the potential opportunity to themselves to shoot as well. And you'll notice I do a return blind fire here versus the Ashashio, using the tracers of their own to know where they are, and I get a hit on. And that is an important hit because it resets their capture progress, and that means they're going to be in the objective longer. I also, at the same time, realise that the Kaga's torpedo bombers are coming in, and I reverse out the way on a parallel line. A simple reversal to do because I was in the parallel direction to their strike position, again through that positioning earlier on with the two landmasses. But you can see those torpedoes of my own now going in towards the Ashashio smoke. They have stopped firing for the time being because they haven't got any valid targets, but as I start to move back out, I'm expecting them to potentially shoot again, but it's too late for the Ashashio because they continue to capture, and they're on that central point of the smoke, and they take a torpedo and they're out of the game. And that's through us simply predicting what they were using the smoke to do. And in return, that means now really our team has secured objective Charlie. We will be able to take it because we've taken out both of their destroyers. So the next question is, what do we do next? Well, until the Talon goes, I cannot capture objective Charlie because the Talon could deploy another radar a little bit later on. I don't know the precise cooldown of that radar, but I assume I've probably got a minute before another radar gets popped. So instead, it would be better for the Fantastique to go into the objective because they've got slightly better concealment than my own ship. And instead, it's time for me to move into the gunboat role, the dedicated gunboat role, which is get in the open water north of objective Charlie and try to help the team burn down the Amagi. Because what you can see is the Amagi, whilst all this was going on, decided to pull themselves out of supporting their team and make their way along the 10 line up into the northeast corner of the map. Now, this is not a terrible play if only it had been actioned much sooner. It would have created a valid crossfire. But because the Amagi is now effectively alone, and whilst it could be argued they have the Talon to work with, the Talon is crippled, and also it's used a lot of its resources already. This Amagi is essentially sailing itself to death. The only difference is how soon we can knock it out. Because in the meantime, look at the minimap and look at Objective Alpha. What you can see is around Objective Alpha, a lot of ships are being lost on our team and the enemy team is getting a foothold. And sure enough, the Talon, a minute after I called it, has deployed another radar set to see what's going on. But this radar set again is not useful because it's not achieving anything, and instead actually the Talon now has to push to counter our Fantastique, taking objective Charlie, but in the process sinks to Johnny's guns because Johnny was anticipating it and he played himself into the correct position to counter the Talon's push. Which means now this Amagi is all by itself, and you'll see that I deploy my heal as soon as I see the high explosive shells incoming from the Amagi's main guns, because I'm expecting those high explosive shells to hit with the Amagi being quite close, less than 10 kilometers away, not an ideal distance. I really want to be about 12 to 13 kilometers away as a minimum versus the Amagi's guns. So that's why I popped my heal early in anticipation of the high explosive damage coming in, and you can see after one heal I've still got just shy of 10,000 health, and I'll have another heal available to me in just over a minute right now, and I can pop that and get the full distance out of that heal as well as I dodge a salvo that time. But what we can also see is because of the damage that we are throwing in, whilst we're getting chip damage with our high explosive shells, the fires that have been set are doing huge damage to the Amagi, and she is going to sink over time. And she's also taken a torpedo from our Le Fantastique, which means there's not much life left in that battleship. And now we have to think about what's next beyond Objective Charlie. We've won Objective Charlie as Johnny deploys his radar, and he does this here to spot the Amagi for Le Fantastique to give them the opportunity to get out of that situation before the Amagi sinks them. But you can see that the Fantastique decides to try and have a trade war versus the Amagi, and this does not work out too well for Le Fantastique, who's going to lose practically all of their health and burn to death in the process. And this is unfortunate here, but this is also an example of overcommitting an objective in what is a gunboat destroyer. The French destroyers being also on that gunboat train, in my opinion. And what you'll see is that eventually the Fantastique does get the kill, but in the process, because they go into 1v1 versus the Amagi for a short period of time, it means they will lose their destroyer versus the Amagi, who they burn down. It's a trade, but it's a negative trade because we didn't need to lose the Fantastique. But again, that is in hindsight. In the process, it was still a fair trade. But now we know that we've committed to and captured Objective Charlie. And I'm going to pause here and ask you a question. In your opinion right now, given the fact that our team has a small points advantage, but it's going to be losing that points advantage soon because Objective Bravo will fall to the enemy team, where do we go? Do we go to Objective Bravo, or do we go to Objective Alpha? Now, if you said go to Objective Alpha, I would agree with you entirely. The reason for that is because if I look at the minimap, look at the information that's been granted to me. If I was in a normal destroyer, I would look at going to Objective Bravo. But if I look at the information available and also look at the information of my own ship's characteristics, I know I can't go to Bravo. There's only one destroyer left on each team. I'm my team's quote-unquote destroyer, albeit I'm not acting as one at this time. And the enemy team's still got an Ognivoy. Now, as I said at the start, the Ognivoy has a detectability by sea of a full concealment build of approximately 6.1 kilometers. So I can never contest an Ognivoy unless they try to act as a gunboat versus my gunboat prowess in open water. I will never be able to spot the Ognivoy before they spot me in a typical scenario. The only way I do so is round the corner of a landmass at close range. But the Ognivoy is spotted in Objective Alpha. And in fact, they're in such a poor position right now in terms of how close they are to Arkansas. I'm suspecting they're probably going to go down or trade a huge amount of health in the process of facing the Kansas, that perhaps our mines will be able to finish them off. So what's capturing Objective Bravo right now? Well, there's only two enemy ships that are taking that objective. The Otago, or alternatively, it could be their carrier. But I get the feeling that their carrier is going to be at the back of the map, because carriers will not normally come forward until the late game, and we are in the mid game right now. We're not even 10 minutes into the match. So it's got to be the Otago taking Bravo. The problem with that is that the Otago has similar detectability by sea to my own ship, as I stated earlier on. So that means in the spotting war, I will spot the Otago roughly the same time they spot me. But in the shooting war, the Otago is the stronger ship, because it's got a good initial muzzle velocity on its 8-inch guns, and the high explosive, one shell hit from a high explosive round from the Otago can wipe off approximately 1,000 to 1,500 health on an unsaturated section of my ship. And looking at my health pool right now, I'm healing at the moment. I'm getting my health back up to over half, but I do not have the health to sustain a 1 versus 1 with the Otago. So I can't go to Bravo. I can look at Bravo, and I can provide vision of what is potentially there and shoot at enemy ships that are south of Bravo or trying to hold on to Bravo, and the Champagne is one of those, which we're going to be trying to hit shortly, but I can never contest it until the Otago's position has been revealed. And I'm 90% confident that Otago right now is in the southeastern corner behind the landmass that is preventing us from seeing them, and effectively using that position to stay concealed from our Amagi, who's making their way away from the western side of the objective. So it would be impossible for me to go after the Otago right now, or even try to take Bravo, because to do so I'd be playing into the enemy team's hands. So the only place I can go towards is Objective Alpha. But as I'm making my way there, I'm now going to change tact. I know I can't play into an objective right now, because to go towards any objective whilst the Otago is still in play and the Ognivoy is still in play means that I'm going to be playing into the enemy team's strengths. Instead, I'm going to be playing towards Alpha, but I'm going to use the open water north of Alpha in order to shoot at enemy ships. And as I make my way there in the open water north of Bravo, I'm going to do the same. I'm now going to go full gunboat, open the guns up, and not really care about whether I'm spotted or not, because whilst my speed boost is about to run out, I've still got a top speed of 42.5 knots, and I've still got my WASD keys. I can mess around with people's aim. So as we resume, we make our way down, and sure enough as well, one thing I have to consider is that whilst I'm a very fast ship, our Monarch and also our Baltimore, i.e. Johnny, are not as fast as myself, so I need to give them time to get into the match again. They've done a great job working together in taking Charlie, but I need to give them time to reposition, reset up and get back in. And with the enemy Ognavoy now falling into our mines, as we anticipated may happen because of where the Ognavoy was positioned, what that means is the stealthiest ship on the enemy team right now is their Ortego. And actually I should pause it once again here. Now this also changes my mindset a little bit. I know I'm the stealthiest ship minus their Ortego. What this now means is that I am the most valuable ship in terms of objective play. If a ship needs to take an objective or needs to provide spotting for the enemy team on the way into an objective or the way out of an objective, I am the one to do so. I have the vision control available to me. And that means in return that I cannot afford to make any brazen plays from this point onwards. I'm too valuable to throw my ship away. And whilst that's not a gunboat style of play, we have to keep it in mind because at the end of the day we are classified as a destroyer, and we should not forget that where we need to, we can be deployed as a destroyer. So we come away from pausing and resume once again, and you'll note that I am initially firing some salvos towards the enemy Ortego, but I then switch over to the Champagne because what I think to myself is that the Champagne at long ranges with its 2x3 combination of guns and its rather squishy armour can be very dangerous if allowed to post itself up in a long distance position and snipe, but if we can get rid of it right now where it's got very little health, then that means that's going to be a key asset on the enemy team taken away. And sure enough, the Champagne is about to be respotted, and when they are respotted out of Objective Bravo, it's our time to throw some more shells in, and our team will do their utmost to finish it off. And once the Champagne's gone, we can then turn our attention to the enemy Ortego, if it is spotted, or alternatively the Massachusetts, which has emerged from Objective Alpha as our Monarch sinks the Champagne. So again, we continue on this gunboating endeavour at this point, and you'll see very shortly that the enemy Ortego does return fire on us, and they're at a good range to return fire, approximately 10 kilometres. So we cannot contest Bravo. We know we're being pushed away from Bravo, but what we can do in return is we can be an absolute nuisance to Massachusetts. Now, I don't have priority target here, but I look at my minimap and immediately see the Ortego. I look out the corner of my eye and see there's incoming high explosive fire, so I'm responding to that. But as I put distance between myself and the enemy Ortego, I'm also keeping at a long range from the enemy Massachusetts, who's got their focus on our Amagi. Now, Amagi is relatively crippled, so what I'm expecting is the Massachusetts will most likely focus our Amagi for the time being. So long as I don't get within, say, 10 kilometres of the Massachusetts or much closer, I'm going to be okay, and they're probably not going to see me as a priority target. So instead, they'll focus on our battleship, and I can simply just keep throwing in high explosive salvo after high explosive salvo, messing around with the position of my ship every so often here as we set a fire on them, and we're going for a follow-up fire now, and we will get that very shortly. And whilst that fire's burning right now, we'll see that once we get the second fire, they're going to burn the damage control party consumable and put it on reload. And once they burn it, the effective thing about that will be is any subsequent fires we can get will do a maximum damage over time, and it's those fires that we really want. So there's the second fire, and you'll see that the Massachusetts will engage its DCP, damage control party is abbreviated, and now we need to go in for the killing fires. There's a 20-second cooldown on that, i.e. and it applies for 20 seconds before it's completely deactivated. But once it's deactivated, that's when we need to go in and do as much burning damage as possible, and also get the occasional little bit of HE Alpha Strike here and there, which is now mounting to approximately 314 health per high explosive shell penetration. But all the way through this, of course, not all the shells are going in and doing anything major, but there we get a fire, and that fire is going to burn for its full duration, and this is where it's really starting to come into effect, because the Massachusetts may be able to get one heal up very shortly to counter the one fire, but if we set a second fire, they will not be able to offset the rate of burn with the rate of healing. So we're just going to keep throwing in high explosive salvo after high explosive salvo. Of course, the Massachusetts is playing forward here, but they're playing forward into the clutches of myself, our Amagi and our Monarch, and we're just part of that, constantly throwing in the shells. At the same time, it is also worth noting at this point that the enemy Atago has actually moved southeastwards away from Objective Bravo, and I do have that in mind because what that enables us to do is play the space around Objective Bravo once the enemy Massachusetts falls. However, with the Massachusetts falling at this point, we now need to pause because I'm actually changing my approach a little bit. In an ideal world, whilst we've got that repeating shell sound, in fact we're going to resume the replay a little bit more here just to get rid of that annoying shell sound in the background. Because of the secondaries of the Massachusetts, it will go very shortly. If we take a pause now and look at the minimap, what we'll notice is this is now a 5 versus 3. However, it's not a guaranteed win, and that is one of the things which could be a mistake here. A pitfall to fall into would be that you assume that this is a guaranteed win because your team's got the numbers. The enemy team has still got 2 objectives. It's still got its carrier. It's still got an Atago player who definitely knows what they're doing with their ship, and it's still got a Hipper. The thing we could do is we could saunter over towards Objective Bravo and we could try to capture it. Well, we've already got a Baltimore and a Monarch there. Now those two combined will have more than enough AA to be able to shrug off the Kaggas attacks and take Objective Bravo, with our Monarch having a good amount of health, and on communications with Johnny in his Baltimore, he's informed me that he's got approximately a third of his health remaining, which gives him enough survivability to stay alive long enough to protect the Monarch to get the objective, or to jointly get the objective. Plus also, he can use the land masses that are within Objective Bravo, particularly if he positions himself on the northeastern edge of Objective Bravo, he can hide himself in the objective long enough to get it. Pretty much a mirror play of what the Atago did earlier on. With the Atago moving southeast, we're reckoning, Johnny and I both thought this at the same time, and in fact actually it was Johnny who pointed this out, that the Atago would probably flick its way up the eastern edge of the map and make its way towards Objective Charlie, and that is the most valid play the Atago could do at this point. If it wants to turn this game around, it's got to find its way back into the game. It's been pushed out of Bravo because of the volume of our fleet, so the only thing it can do is go for an attack on Objective Charlie and try to force out our Lexington. It doesn't know whether the Lexington's there, of course, but it can probably see the planes returning to the north, and so if it goes towards the Lexington, it could take it out of the game. Alternatively, the Atago could come down towards Objective Alpha, but I'm not thinking it's going to because of where it went earlier on, and the Atago would have to double back on itself and put itself in a crossfire with me and the Amagi on one front, and the Monarch and the Baltimore on another front. So that would make the Atago's play very difficult to pull off, and be all the way down to RNG in terms of whether we get accurate salvos off. So in return, I don't need to go towards Objective Bravo, but I can feel very confident about going towards Objective Alpha because I've already seen, and I'm going to see it again very shortly, that the Hipper is on very low health. It's on 7,000 health. And a German heavy cruiser with its anemic HE versus the fact I've got just shy of 9,000 health and a hill in hand means that I can take that fight without issue. And now, once I've got rid of the Hipper, you'll see that I go to the destroyer role. I focus more on getting objectives and providing vision rather than gunboating my way to victory. So as we resume now, I'm going to make that play into effect. The Hipper fires a salvo versus Amagi, which means that she's going to be spotted for a further 20 seconds, and this is all good information, because right now I'm keeping the Hipper spotted, and in fact I engage my speed boost here, because what I want to do is close the distance to the Hipper before it can get in amongst the land masses on the eastern side of Objective Alpha, because if I'm able to catch it just in time, then as our Monarch makes its way into Objective Bravo, which I've noticed, the Monarch may have the ability to help me take the Hipper out. As the Hipper is now respotted by myself, in the fact they're trying to make their way out of the objective, I've caught them just before they're able to escape, and whilst they could have perhaps potentially turned southwestward to get themselves into a safer position, instead, because they do not and they continue to rotate themselves towards the southeast, we've caught them in the perfect position to knock them out of the game, because I'll be throwing in some damage at long distance, where their health now being 4,500 thanks to a Monarch shell going in and penetrating, but we'll see very shortly a further salvo comes in to help us finish off this German heavy cruiser, and when it's gone, this starts to really shut down the game. Now Johnny at this point is requesting support, of course, on Objective Bravo because he's worried about that Atago, who has been respotted making its way eastwards briefly, and it's getting itself into a position to combat Johnny and try and make its way towards Charlie. Our Monarch takes down the Hipper as was planned, and what this now means is that we can take Objective Alpha, and I want to take Objective Alpha first and foremost here because I'm too far away to help influence whatever happens now in terms of the situation with the Atago pushing upwards towards Charlie, and it's going to take Johnny out unfortunately, but Johnny made brilliant plays throughout, and it's not to his discredit the fact that he's finally fallen to the Atago. It is what it is, but he should give himself a pat on the back. But what we can see is that as we're making our way towards Objective Alpha, and I'm just watching here to see the relative strengths of the squads of the Kaga, and also to keep an eye on the Monarch's health, I know now if I take Objective Alpha, then I make it impossible for the enemy team to get back into this game. Because even if our Monarch was to suddenly take a torpedo from the Kaga's torpedo bombers and detonate, our Amagi is so far away right now, and our Lexington is in such a nice position that effectively what it means is that our team is going to gain a huge number of points to pull enough of a gap that if we start to lose ships, our Amagi could just run to the corner of the map. I could just run to the corner of the map and disappear in the remaining 4.5 minutes. It becomes a case of where's Wally in those remaining minutes, and our team's just gaining points all the time. And what this also does, it potentially draws the enemy Kaga into having to come forward to try and take an objective with the ship itself rather than the planes. You'll see that they're putting the pressure on our Monarch, but it's not enough to bring the Monarch's health down rapidly, and we have to assume that our Monarch still has at least one super heal remaining where they're given the ability to print themselves a new ship. So they have a huge health point advantage in their favour. And I slowed down a little bit in Objective Alpha to make sure I don't overrun the objective mid-capturing it, so that way I capture it and then leave the objective at approximately full speed, and we can see that our Lexington was able to take the Otago down. The Otago had a limited amount of health remaining. Of course we could not see that, but our Lexington taking them out affirms to us now that this is pretty much in the bag, given the fact we've taken the objectives and now we've only got one target to eliminate. So I guess the question is, what about that final hill? Will we get to use it and go for a Dreadnought medal? Well, of course we will here, because our endeavour now is to take the carrier out, and we've got a lot of time to do so. We spot the carrier, and we're going to be opening fire on them, and immediately the enemy carrier is going to turn its bombers towards us. Now, I'm not too worried about this. I'm absolutely fine with being attacked by the Kaga's planes, because if I fall, then our team's going to finish them off. The only thing I need to do right now is try and do as much damage in as short a period of time as possible. The first drop from the Kaga's bombers is going to do a huge amount of damage. It's going to knock off half my remaining health, but that's why I do have the heal remaining, and I immediately trigger it. Because what you can see is that the Kaga's coming around for another pass, and if I go for the heal now, then I'm going to get a lot of health back in order to make sure I can sustain at least one more drop. And sure enough, the Kaga's planes come in, and as they drop here, I'm on 6,000 health, and I'm going to lose another 4,000. So picking that time to pop the heal was the perfect time, and it means now that whilst I'm going to finish my heal on approximately 4,000 health, the flip side of the coin will be I can probably take at least one rocket plane salvo before I go down. I've thrown my torpedoes out, by the way. If you're wondering why I did them the way I did, it's because I anticipated the Kaga would be sailing on a straight course, albeit it's a rather nasty course, which means I'm probably not going to get more than one torpedo hit, and in fact I will only get one torpedo hit, but it's to put in some damage with these torpedoes, which are quite effective, and with the Kaga coming around for one more pass here, I just need to get in a good salvo, which I'm going to try and do so with some armour piercing very shortly, to finish them off as they make one pass with the rocket planes, they make a second pass with the rocket planes, both miss, and now it's time to finish them off and seal the game in our team's favour. Here's the final salvo. Now that was a good game, and on our way to picking up 168,651 HP of damage, we can see that we picked up 5 achievements: a Devastating Strike, Confederate, Dreadnought, First Blood, and High Caliber. And as we come over to the team scores, we can see that we topped our team in terms of base experience earned with 3,219. Our role in this game was to deploy ourselves as a gunboat, but keep in mind that in the opening stages of the game, we played more like an annoying light cruiser embedded behind a landmass near an objective and took up a defensive posture around Objective Charlie rather than played open water gunboat or objective based destroyer. We then, as we went deeper into the match after securing Charlie, switched between those two roles, being aware of the fact when our concealment was the strongest of any ship remaining in the game and we could embody the role of more of an objective-taking destroyer, whereas outside of that we were primarily a damage dealer and a long-range harasser in that gunboat role. And it's being able to master that balance of knowing when to switch between acting like a light cruiser, being that open water destroyer gunboat, and acting as an objective-based destroyer is what, in my opinion, makes or breaks your success when playing a gunboat destroyer. Coming on to our detailed report, we have one key item to note here, and that is the contribution of fire damage to our total damage output. With our 11 fires providing 52,615 HP of damage and leaving us just under 8,000 HP shy of a Witherer medal, fires and floods can make a key part of a gunboat destroyer's overall output. in the fact that the damage over time that is achieved through multiple fires being set on an enemy battleship should not be underestimated, and means that you can gradually wear down enemy ships rather than go for pure alpha strike damage. And that is what we tried to do whenever we went into that open water situation, was try to find a target that we could burn down successfully, and the enemy Amagi and Massachusetts are two targets which are of key mention. And finally, coming on to our credits and experience earned, we can see that after additions and deductions, we walked away 529,854 silver credits and 16,628 commander experience. With that, that's all we've got time for today, but I do hope this video has proven useful and can propel you to gunboating glory. If you have found it useful, be sure to let me know by leaving a like, comment or subscribing for future World of Warships content on my channel. But until next time, as always ladies and gentlemen, fair winds and following seas.